So I don't really want to die or be impaled on the hill that is the Barbie film, because that seems to me like an incredibly inane and unnecessary way to go. So making this video actually feels like a little bit of a bad idea. I even woke up in a cold sweat the other day thinking that I'd emailed a bunch of editors at 1 a.m. with a story with the headline "Barbie doesn't deserve any Oscars." It turns out, fortunately, I had emailed a bunch of editors at 1 a.m, but the story I pitched was called "Barbie isn't owed any Oscars," which is fortunately a subtle difference. And I haven't had my feminist card revoked yet. I can still access the basement where we keep all the cauldrons and the newts and the backup copies of The Handmaid's Tale. For those of you smart enough to spend a little less time on the internet than I do, here's the recap of the rather pointless but unintentionally quite informative Barbie drama. Can't believe I'm actually doing this. The Barbie film from 2023 was nominated for 8 Oscars. However, because its director and lead actress, Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie respectively, were not nominated for Best Director and Best Actress, while co-star Ryan Gosling was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, the internet went into an absolute meltdown, or at least parts of the internet did. Countless articles and enraged tweets said, "Oh, this proves the whole point that the Barbie film was trying to make. The patriarchy is alive and well, and it's ridiculous that the male lead in the film is nominated, while the woman who made the film and the woman who starred in the film didn't get any nominations. Outrageous." It's an exhausting kind of argument. People are absolutely right that the patriarchy continues to thrive, and that the people who vote on which films deserve an Oscar are overwhelmingly pale, male and stale, and racism and sexism in the Academy are alive and well. Yet in this instance, they're wrong in their belief that the omission of Gerwig and Robbie from the nominations is in some way some kind of injustice, because even with the context of the Barbie film being what it is, being all anti-patriarchy, it's not an injustice, it's just an irony. What interests me most about this whole media vortex surrounding the film and discussions of the nominations and discussions about feminism is how performative it all is. This outrage actually tells us a lot about how the media works, and in that sense it's a really great case study for learning a bit more about media literacy and arguments surrounding female representation. You might be wondering at this point, what do you know about media, random woman on the internet? Which is a great question. So some quick introductions. My name's Rosalind. I'm a PR and communications specialist by day, a freelance journalist by night, and an embittered husk of a woman 24/7. So this topic is deeply personal to me, and maybe I have some insights into media that might be of interest and offer something useful. We're going to look at these ideas in 3 parts. Firstly, we're going to consider why Gerwig and Robbie not being nominated is actually a non-issue. Secondly, we're going to ask, if it's a non-issue, then why is it being reported like it's a big deal? And thirdly, we're going to ask, what are the consequences really of this issue being reported as a big deal? Who really wins here? Whose interests are really at heart? Let's debunk this idea quickly. Firstly, it's no big surprise that Ryan Gosling delivered a show-stealing performance in this film. He was essentially the film's villain, and there's a reason that actors love playing villains. It's because they often have the most complex character arcs, which really allow the actors to show their skill and a range of their acting. So in that sense, even though Margot Robbie was the lead of this film, it was Ryan Gosling who got the plum role. And also in the case of this film, American culture has long infantilized women, which means that, unfortunately, a grown woman pretending to be a grown woman pretending to be a doll in a film is far less remarkable than a grown man pretending to be a doll. This means that Margot Robbie's performance feels more familiar than Ryan Gosling's, and therefore less remarkable. This is not to cast aspersions on her acting, it's rather just to observe that maybe the reason Margot Robbie wasn't nominated for an Oscar was simply because her role didn't offer as much scope for acting that felt really fresh within our wider social expectations of how men and women behave. It's also worth noting that her co-star, America Ferrera, was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, so it's not like all the women in the Barbie film were left out, just the blonde ones sometimes. Greta Gerwig, meanwhile, directed a good film, an entertaining film, but it's not necessarily a masterpiece of a film. I wouldn't even say it's her best film, not by a long shot. The film had a sometimes pretty standard hero's journey plotline, so I don't really think it was outstanding. And of course the visuals were very beautiful, but then it was a very well-financed film. It's not entirely surprising that the visuals were beautiful, and yes, it broke box office records, but it also did so in part because of decades and decades of Mattel product marketing, which means that this already had a lot of momentum behind it. Now, this could absolutely sound like I'm just saying, oh, you know, Greta Gerwig didn't do anything. That's not what I'm saying. I don't say this to deny Gerwig credit, but rather just to nuance exaltations of the film's success. Also, lots of people are talking about how Barbie is like amazingly subversive and radical and inclusive, but if you really wanted to be subversive and radical and inclusive, you'd have let Australian actress Margot Robbie keep her Australian accent. That's the real scandal that no one is talking about here. Why are Australian actors not? Also, it's worth noting that Gerwig was still nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, so it's not like she was snubbed or missed out entirely. And sure, yes, the film was nominated for Best Picture, but as I understand it, 10 films were nominated for Best Picture, and there were only 5 Best Director slots. So it's not like every film that was nominated for Best Picture also got a Best Director nomination. And it's also not just Gerwig who missed out, there are other female directors who weren't chosen. So it just feels like a leap in logic to me to say Gerwig missed out, ergo it's sexism. And I love to point out sexism. So to sum up, as a feminist Australian woman, part of me would love to see Greta Gerwig and especially Margot Robbie win all the prizes. However, I also don't think that either necessarily deserves to win all the prizes, and certainly not for the banal reason that they were involved in a film that criticises the patriarchy, ergo they are more deserving than their male co-star. And that's why I find it kind of frustrating that some critics claim that Gerwig and Robbie were snubbed. And I guess it's actually not just some critics, this was all over the news, major news outlets were reporting on this. And I feel like it actually kind of does a bit of a disservice to the feminist cause, because it fixates on a complete non-issue and thereby kind of trivializes real issues and real injustices, as well as meaningful feminist arguments. What I'm really interested in is how this story is being reported and why. The media reports Barbie was snubbed at the Oscars. The problem is here, based on what we've just discussed, that actually wasn't really the case, was it? Snubbing implies that the film was denied something that rightfully belonged to it, or that it wasn't adequately recognised. But one can definitely argue that that's just not true. And this is where my little media spidey senses begin tingling, and I begin thinking, okay, so what's really going on here? Why is this story being reported in this way? So it's being communicated in this way not just to communicate facts, but rather to communicate a story that has been deliberately crafted to create outrage and thereby drive engagement. And when you drive engagement, such as clicks, you also drive revenue for media outlets. The case of the so-called Barbie snub is actually a great example of how media organisations have shifted, and in some instances been forced to shift from harder reporting to a more entertainment style of news in order to actually compete with entertainment channels. The lines between media and entertainment are also increasingly blurred across a variety of topics, including, worryingly, politics. And in media, editors and publishers are interested in getting the most engagement possible, and that's partly because that's how these media organizations survive. The ones that aren't state-owned do need some form of profit. So sometimes the more balanced viewpoint gets sidelined, which is how, instead of getting a story about how, well, actually Barbie was nominated for 8 Oscars and there were only 5 Best Director slots, and this is all actually pretty good for a film which isn't the greatest thing since sliced bread, we instead get a different framing of the facts that tells the story as Barbie was snubbed, 2 women were robbed, because that's more dramatic and it drives more engagement. I also found it really interesting to see how this headline became really strongly mirrored across a lot of outlets. So Barbie got snubbed at the Oscars, snub, snub, snub. And what I found interesting about that was it also made me think about how when you write a story as a journalist, you often don't get a lot of control over the headline. It will be an editor, I think, who usually picks the headline. I've certainly had this experience many times where I've written an article and my proposed headline is not the headline that gets published. And instead, what will be published is usually something that it's deliberately designed to be picked up by search engines. So headlines are often made to be a little bit more sensationalist in order to grab attention better. And that's how, again, you go from facts to Barbie got robbed, snubbed, and it's an affront to women. So from a social perspective, what are the consequences of this drama and outrage, and who really wins? So a consequence is, of course, the outrage. The big downside is that this fuels a sort of tribalism and an us and them mentality. It's like news outlets are pouring oil on the fire and goading people into engaging by insinuating that there has been some great affront to a particular group of people. And in this instance, it brings forth all the people who believe in women's rights, myself included. It kind of goads us to read the snubbing story and get all up in arms. Something that frustrates me about this story, and has since I first saw it kind of trending on the internet, was that a lot of very well-meaning and intelligent people are getting up in arms about this story and rightly pointing out the history of sexism and racism at the Oscars. Those are good things to point out. But this particular story about Barbie being snubbed is actually a bit of a non-issue. It's a story being presented as something real, but there isn't really much substance to it. And so when feminists get up in arms, it actually, when we feminists get up in arms, it actually makes us look kind of stupid in this instance. And I hate that, because feminism is important, and I don't like to see misogynists getting anything that is like fuel for the fire of their own bigotry. Because unfortunately, if a misogynist says, in relation to this story, this isn't a big deal, why do you care? Unfortunately, in this one instance, they're right. And my concern would be that if you give a misogynist even one taste of being right in relation to a supposedly feminist issue, this story again shouldn't exist, isn't actually a feminist issue. But if they feel like they're right and they've seen through the triviality of this particular Barbie snubbed story and this particular feminist issue, then they might feel more entitled to lean into other actual really strong bigoted beliefs that they have, such as around, for example, why there shouldn't be quotas, or an idea that women complain too much or ask for too much. So I guess the risk of feminism looking a little bit silly or being trotted out for issues that are actually trivial or non-stories is that then people who are already inclined to denigrate and trivialize feminism might feel even more emboldened to do so. We see a lot of this narrative spin in the context of identity politics, and that's because the personal can sell, and so the media will often look into stories and kind of read into everything and think, where's the uncomfortable personal identity angle that we can draw out and turn into outrage and revenue. And you also see this just generally when you're considering what is a newsworthy story. Certain qualities that make a story newsworthy include that it's timely, or that it's about, a universally important issue, or that it's about something really rare and unusual that no one's heard about before, and that's exciting, or that it's quirky. And one of the things that can make a story newsworthy is that it has a strong personal angle or strong emotional angle. And so that's why you see a lot of this news being generated, which is actually sometimes it's important to report the personal, but sometimes it's something personal that is being magnified and turned into a story where it doesn't need to be. What kind of frustrates me the most about this pointless drama around the Barbie film and the Oscars is that it could actually have negative repercussions for real people. Because this story is fueling a sense of outrage and irritation, both in people who feel like someone has been wronged and in people who think, why is this a story? I hate that this is a story. I'd argue that when you really think about it and ask, what's the media getting out of this? It's likely that the media doesn't really care that much about representing people involved in this story in a way that actually represents reality or is done in good faith. Rather, this story is represented purely for audiences, purely to create something personal, emotive, dramatic for a peanut crunching crowd. It's just not thoughtful or considerate towards the real people in the story. It draws Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie and even Ryan Gosling into this kind of vortex of attention that I would argue doesn't actually do them any favours. This story risks making Gerwig and Robbie look kind of petulant or even tainted in some way, because it's fabricated a story about them being robbed, and then maybe it kind of looks like they're complaining or like they're saying that they're owed something. But they're not actually the ones driving this story. Media outlets want outrage and engagement and views. And the people who suffer, even the people, in this case the women who people have rushed to defend Gerwig and Robbie, yet they've been caught up in something so stupid that I feel like they kind of risk facing a backlash, which they don't actually deserve. I really hope that people have the media literacy to see through this bad faith clickbait reporting and to not begin seeing Greta Gerwig as a demanding shrew or Margot Robbie as a brat, because to my knowledge they didn't ask for this, and the maelstrom around them is making money off them. It's not really seeking to right any injustice, perceived or otherwise. And indeed, I think the great injustice here is basically that these two women are actually kind of being made into a bit of a joke by being the centre of some kind of grotesque spectacle. And they risk suffering backlash as a result. It actually reminds me of the backlash against Twilight and its author Stephenie Meyer and lead actress Kristen Stewart, and also other actresses such as Jennifer Lawrence. These people, and in the case of Twilight books and films, they were really hyped and they were elevated well above what they actually offered and placed on extremely high pedestals, to the point that tearing them down began to seem almost logical. However, that very quickly spiraled into a lot of hate and unwarranted hate, because Stephenie Meyer never said that she wrote the best book ever, and Jennifer Lawrence never said she was the funniest woman alive. But once hype attains a great height, it can also attract a lot of cruelty and judgment. And, I'm not going to rush to defend Twilight's literary quality in this instance, but I do think it's worth considering that it is in part marketing and media that build up hype around people and expectations around people and products. And then when these things fail to meet expectations, sometimes the people or products are held as guilty or responsible and they are blamed, but it's not necessarily them who were marketing themselves as the greatest thing ever. And so in the same way that, for example, Stephenie Meyer, I don't believe, ever said she wrote the greatest book ever, Jennifer Lawrence never said she was the funniest woman alive, I don't think Greta Gerwig or Margot Robbie have come out and said we made the greatest movie ever. And so when I see a lot of noise being made about how Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie were completely snubbed at the Oscars, I do begin to wonder, is a backlash on its way? Are we about to see a lot of articles about how annoying Greta Gerwig is? Because I wouldn't be surprised, but it also wouldn't really be fair because, again, to my knowledge, she didn't ask for this. It's just a dramatic personal story that is being built around her to profit other people, but not to represent her accurately. That's not the main goal, and certainly not to treat her with any kind of kindness. Even if, ironically, it's being presented as us all rushing to Greta Gerwig's defense. This whole drama emphatically does not matter in and of itself. It simply offers a potentially interesting way into looking at how media can operate. It's a good case study. It's a good example of how media outlets can goad people into caring about a topic that doesn't need debate and fighting about a topic that doesn't need debate, and can, in some instances, make feminists consequently look a little bit irrational and preoccupied with something that shouldn't be a story. This, in turn, can turn people against the feminist cause. And, ironically, the endless cataloguing of this snub can actually make the women in the film seem more annoying than they really are or have shown themselves to be, which in turn could lead to a backlash against them, which isn't really fair. So I guess it's an example that reminds us that, to an extent, media outlets do always serve themselves, and they do have to consider profit, and they do have their own interests. And that's also why publicly owned broadcasters are so important, because they do tend to report the facts a little bit more rather than just the drama and the sensationalism. And I think I have exhausted all I have to say on this topic. I'm going to go away now and try not to get impaled by anyone who thinks that I hate women. So thank you for spending this time with me. Have a beautiful day, and don't trust everything you read or encounter on the internet. Except this video, of course. You can trust this video.